Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the third part of DCR's Minimum Viable Company series. So this one is part 3, from safety net to strategic enabler. Just to introduce myself, so Brian Hercombe, I'm a director in DCR Partners. I've been in and around the resilience space for about 30 years, give or take, aging myself completely, and I lead on all things resilience and cyber. Right?
Yeah, nice to meet you all. Ryan Taylor, manager at DCR Partners. Got some broad experience in financial services, and again, focus with Brian on resilience, crisis management, and at the moment MVC.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. So just a little bit of housekeeping. We've got an hour overall, 11 till 12. The aim is to kind of wrap up about 1:45 to leave plenty of time for questions. All right. So please drop your questions in the chat throughout, and we will at the end. All right. We are recording the session. I hope that's all right for everybody, and there'll be access available afterwards. And as per the other two, we'll have a kind of roundup handout that we will send out a few days after as well. Okay. So why don't we get into it? So, as I said, welcome. So part 1, we set out what a minimum viable company is and why it matters, and in part 2, we talk you through how you build one. So you already know the what and you know the how. Today, we're going to change the lens a bit, and it's going to reframe the whole series.
Yeah, and this isn't, it's worth being clear on what that means, because this isn't just more MVC. Today steps back from MVC to the thing it was always part of, and then it turns that thing around and shows you the size of it most organizations never see.
Here's the shift in one line. So MVC is usually understood as a defensive capability. We talk about the test of whether you survive when everything that can go wrong has gone wrong. And that's true, and it matters. But survival is only half of what this is for. The same thing that keeps you alive under pressure is the thing that lets you act with confidence when the opportunity comes. So the aim by the end of the hour is that you stop seeing this as a safety net and start seeing it as something that earns its place on the balance sheet on every ordinary day. It's not a cost of compliance, it's foundational infrastructure.
Yeah, and rather than talk about that in the abstract, we're going to take a single organization through a single severe event, start to finish, and show you the whole thing working. But first, Brian's going to be precise about what we're actually talking about, because the whole session turns on that one distinction.
Thanks. So look, here's the distinction. Right? As I just said, MVC is a test, and it asks one question. Can your institution hold its absolute minimum under the most severe conditions it could plausibly face? Vital question, and it's the right place to start, and it's why we started there. But it's a test, and it's not the thing being tested. The thing being tested is the floor. So the floor is the structure of everything that matters to your survival and to your ability to stay in control of your own future. It's not a list of important services, it's the thing deeper that sits beneath them. And here's the first key idea. The floor isn't flat. It has 2 layers. It's got a hard core of musts, things that you hold to the absolute last, whatever it costs, and a much larger layer of shoulds and coulds. The things you prefer to hold, but could let go under pressure without ceasing to be yourself. And the line between those two is survival. Below it, the non-negotiable core, that's your MVC. So your MVC hasn't gone anywhere, it's just found its place. It's the survival core of your floor, and the floor is much bigger than it.
Yeah, so, let's make this real, and you'll recognize the story and the theme from one of our original webinars. It's easier to see this in a live organization than it is on a diagram. So meet Wintergate Building Society. They're mid-sized, regional, member-owned. It's invented but everything about it will feel relatively familiar. You know, Wintergate has done the work. It can see its flaw. Its musts, the core it holds to the last, are really few and stark. You know, members must be able to reach their money. It must be able to provide accurately what it owes and to whom. It must hold its regulatory permissions, right? And it must stay above its capital and liquidity thresholds. That's its survival core. You know, lose any of it, and Wintergate stops being a society in control of its own future. Above that core sits the shoulds and coulds that Brian's just mentioned, right? So it's new mortgage lending, the branch appointment system, marketing, month-end reporting, product development, etc., etc. All of that matters, and Wintergate would rather keep it running, but it could let any of it degrade and still be a functioning building society, in effect, still Wintergate.
And hold on to that distinction, the stark core and the flexible layer above it, because it's that distinction that's going to save Wintergate's life as we work through. So now let's talk about the floor and what it's actually made of. Three kinds of things. And this matters because they fail in three completely different ways. Let's start with stocks. So your stocks are your reserves that drain. Think about capital, right? Confidence, reputation, regulatory standing, cohesion. They don't fail suddenly, they deplete over time. Now, in a crisis, under stress, they can deplete quite quickly. But equally, day to day, slowly in the calm, they can deplete too. And actually, it's the slow drain in the calm that's the dangerous one, because nobody's watching. We move on to binaries. So these are the hard lines that are held or breached. They're binary, they're on or they're off. All right, you meet them or you don't. So think about capital thresholds, a permission, whether client money is segregated or not. So you don't drift across these, they're held and then they breach. And the moment one goes, everything changes. And I think the important part here is you didn't choose them and you can't negotiate them away. They're imposed from the outside. All right. So think about a building society. There's things in the Building Society Act that you must do. Right? Same as insurance, musts. All right. There are regulations that you must meet at all times. Those become your binaries. You either do or you don't. And they're always imposed from the outside. And then the interesting bit, elected obligations. These are the things you've chosen to hold because they're who you are as an organization. And they're the interesting ones because they fell three ways at once. So at the top, the decisions hold, right? You don't change your mind. But behind that, the means to deliver it. So example, we will always pay our staff. Sounds really obvious, doesn't it? 4 months into a crisis, Jaguar Land Rover had to make some really, really difficult choices, right? The decision held, but the means behind it started to drain, i.e. the resources started to thin. But actually the third part, right, the capability to deliver it can break outright. So you remember in webinar 2, we talked about the capabilities that sit below these that deliver them. So the decision can be intact, the money can be there, but the capability to deliver it can break outright.
Yeah, and look, you can see all three in our example in Wintergate, right? So its stocks are member confidence, its liquidity, its capital, its standing with the regulator, its binaries or its capital and liquidity thresholds and its permissions, and its central elected obligation is one that every building society lives by. We will always let our members reach their money. You know, hold that one in mind because when the event comes, it fails in exactly the way that Brian just described. You know, the decision never wavers. You know, Wintergate never decides to stop. Means the funding behind honouring withdrawals comes under pressure. And the capability, the actual system that lets members reach an account is the thing that the attack or threat actor goes for. You know, the will is there, the money's there, and the member still can't reach their account.
So we talked about where your floor comes from in webinar 1, webinar 2. So we understand it. These are the 3 parts to it. They're similar for organizations from the same sector, broadly because your regulatory environment is the same. So that's your binaries. But your stocks and your electric obligations could be different. All right. So once you've defined it, 2 things follow the moment that you can see your floor. And you turn it from a diagram on a wall into a live instrument. Firstly, you can measure it, not just where each part sits, but which way it's moving and how fast. All right, position, direction, and velocity. And that's the difference between knowing you have a problem and knowing you have a fault zone. It's the only version you can actually act on. Second, and this is the one that matters most, the 3 parts aren't separate. All right. Stocks, binaries, and elected obligations, they interact underneath the surface, and the interactions compound. For example, a stock draining weakens the capability behind an obligation. A binary breaching could accelerate the stock draining, and the stock draining far enough breaches a binary. So the floor isn't 3 lines side by side. It's actually quite a complex connected matrix. And its most dangerous behavior is the compound one, where several things move together and carry you across a line that no single part, watched on its own, ever looked close to.
Yeah, and Windgate has instrumented its floor, right? So it doesn't just know that these parts exist, it can actually watch them move, which means it's seen something most organizations never see. It's traced the chain of a serious operational failure would set off. Core outage takes member services down, confidence starts to move, deposits, the stock, begin to drain. The drain tightens liquidity, which pushes it towards a regulatory threshold, a binary. And then the same event draws the regulator's attention. So standings under pressure too. 4 things, each survivable alone, but moving together. Windgate has seen that its real exposure was never the outage, it was the 4 things that the outage sets off in conjunction.
Which brings us to the sentence the rest of the hour kind of hangs on. The floor isn't a line that you fall to or fall back. It's a line that you can see. And because you can see it, every decision about your survival and how far you can push rests on that reading. And here's a problem across our whole sector. Almost nobody can see their floor. They're built in an institution, they're running it every day, and they've got no clear reading of the one thing that would end them. They carry a vague sense that failure sits somewhere below them, but they can't see how close it is, which way it's moving, or how fast. And that does one of 2 things. It makes them fly high and cautious, never using the capability they've actually got, or lets them push blind into a line they never saw. And once you can see your floor and see how the parts interact, you can do something powerful before anything's even happened. You can wargame it. Take a severe event, run it forward against your floor, and watch the chain unfold on paper. And make your decisions in the calm. All right. Tuesday afternoon when the sun is shining, when you've got time to think, instead of at 3 in the morning when the building is on fire.
Which is exactly what Wintergate did, right? Months before the event, in a quiet room, it wargamed the severe operational shock against its floor. It watched the chain, service down, confidence moving, deposits draining, liquidity tightening, standing under pressure all at once. And because it could see it coming, it made decisions again on a Tuesday afternoon with very minimal pressure. It decided in advance what shoulds and coulds it would let go, and to go and protect the musts. Pre-authorized the trades. It agreed who decides what and at what level. So nobody would be waiting for permission when speed really mattered. And it settled those hard questions on a Tuesday afternoon when the sun is shining, around some biscuits and a cup of tea.
None of which felt urgent at the time, but all of which was about to matter more than anything. Now, the moment you build your floor, this good, you've created something that is incredibly valuable, and valuable things attract attention. So 3 things follow. You need to protect what the floor is made of first and hardest before the rest of the estate. Okay, when we think about priorities in an organization or organizations we work with, we add a new priority and we call it level 0. Everybody has priority 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We add priority 0. Okay, and it is the most important thing in your organization and therefore attracts the highest level of protection. All right. We don't spread it evenly across everything, we concentrate on the floor. And second, and nobody really expects this one, the minute you build a precise picture of exactly what keeps you alive and where you're fragile, you've created something that in the wrong hands is essentially a target pack. It tells an adversary precisely where to strike. So that map becomes one of your most sensitive assets. And third, most important, you have to be able to trust what you see. You have to be able to trust how you read your floor. Okay, if we've instrumented it, okay, it's all about the readings, as we said before, direction, velocity relative to your breach points, because everything rests on your ability to read it accurately. And this is exactly where the threat's heading. If you think about how the adversary has evolved, steal the data, then they encrypted it, then they ransomed it, then they destroyed your ability to recover. And the next step already forming is deception. So they don't need to knock you over. They just make your instruments lie. So it leaves you reading what you think is a really healthy floor while the real one's quietly gone. So you sit below the line, believing you're safe, and you never make the move that would have saved you because every gauge says you don't need to. False reading is worse than a blind spot because it removes the caution and it leaves the confidence.
Yeah, and Wintergate understands this, right? It guards its floor map closely and it builds its readings to be trustworthy, which is about to, which is about to need. So because the threat that tests all of those things at once is now the one walking through its door.
Here's the whole picture in one frame, and this is the one to kind of hold on to. At the top, the reason all exists, forward motion, the ability to move forward with confidence, all right? And everything beneath it makes that same. Across the top, identity, who you are, and your determinations to stay in control of your own future. And I think this may be worth just pausing on that point, stay in control of your own future. I've heard a number of times from a number of different people, your organization ceases to exist should you breach your floor. It's just not true. All right. I think it's much fairer to say that you probably stop being in control of your own future at that point. The regulator is knocking on the door telling you to do X, Y, and Z. Okay. Optionality starts to narrow. All right. So it's not quite below that line you're dead, but life certainly gets much harder. But then when we think about the floor, it's in 2 layers. So in green, the upper layer, these are the shoulds and the coulds. That's where your adaptability and your strategic optionality live. That's your room to move. And then below the line that matters most, the red. Below it, the lower layer, these are the musts. These are your survival core. That's where your MBC lives. And then, of course, across the bottom, risk appetite. And risk appetite is the dial that sets where every line is. Everything strategic lives in that upper layer because that's where your choices are. And because you have choices, you can do 2 things a blind institution can't. You can trade and you can war game. So everything else in the session essentially comes down to those 2 things.
Yeah. And that's the moment Wintergate's ordinary Tuesday around taking some biscuits ends. Ransomware hits, massive event, core systems are encrypted, member services are down, and the attackers have gone for the recovery environment too. So Wintergate at this point can't simply just restore and move on.
I think here's the first hard truth of this. From this second, from the moment of impact, Wintergate is already in recovery. There is no switch to flip later. The clock started and it's counted down. So the first thing Senior Floor lets you do is trade, and we just mentioned it. So we have our stocks, our obligations, and our binaries. All right. Trading is essentially flexing your floor. It doesn't have to be static. You can move slack from one part to another, and you can spend what you can afford to lose to protect what you can't. You pull capacity from everywhere that isn't essential right now and concentrate it where it is. And trading is no fixed direction. You trade to survive and you trade to win. And actually, the truth is, in an organization, you tend to do both at the same time. After an attack on the way down, trading is how you give ground in order, spending the shoulds and the coulds to hold the musts. So you arrive at your survival core intact instead of falling through it.
Yeah, and you watch Wintergate do exactly that. It doesn't try to hold on to everything, which is what a society that couldn't see its fall would do. Spread itself thin, running out of capacity before it's secured what actually keeps it alive. Instead, Wintergate reads its flaw and gives ground deliberately. New lending, marketing, the appointment system, month-end reporting, all of it degraded on purpose and deliberately. The shoulds and coulds spent to free every ounce of capacity for the musts, and it flexes a binary. It goes to the regulator and says, we can't meet this filing on time. We need relief because we're holding the things that would end us first, right? A real conscious, rational decision. That's not a failure. That's Wintergate flexing its floor on their own terms, using a decision it had already rehearsed in peacetime. A controlled descent, not a blackout, and again, all down to knowing what Wintergate's flaw is.
That phrase, a known flaw, that's the whole point. Because now Wintergate is on its floor, battered indeed, but you can see exactly where it stands. It built and instrumented the floor deliberately, so it's bought itself time and clarity. It's not thrashing, it's standing on ground it understands, thinking, planning, moving forward.
Yeah. Which is where the hardest work begins, right? Because on the floor, Wintergate's fighting on two fronts at once. On one front, it's holding its floor, trading and flexing to stay alive as its stocks drain against the clock. On the other, it's fighting the ransomware itself. The technical battle to contain it, eradicate it, and rebuild clean. And underneath both, it's working with the regulator, its funders, above all, its members. Communicating early and honestly to show the drain in confidence and to buy time.
And it splits the team. One part is fighting today's battle. It's deeply concerned about the next 24 and 48 hours. All right. And one part is starting to look forward. And at every level, it fights for a clear picture, separating what's actually known from what people fear and from professional judgment. Because under this much pressure, those three things get confused. When a decision built on fear, dressed up as fact, goes wrong fast. And Wintergate can hold it, only because the decisions were made in the calm and the floor is visible beneath its feet. Trading is what you do to live in the moment. Wargaming is what you do to decide where you're going, and it shows up twice. Once before the event to rehearse the descent, which Wintergate did, and again at the bottom to choose the recovery, which is actually the harder use. Because when the tide turns and you can finally lift your eyes in the battle, You hit a question with no obvious answer. Recover to where? There is no baseline to go back to. The world has moved while you were down and your floor is damaged. So we talk about recovering back. Actually, you always recover forward. Things have changed, the market's changed, less customers, your floor is damaged. All right, so we actually recover forward. And the forward position is a genuine choice. And you can't, or you shouldn't, pick it on instinct, because the floor's wrecked and the interactions are more tangled than ever. So you wargame your courses of action. Take each candidate forward position, run it against your battered floor, and see which one you can actually reach, what it costs, what it exposes, and whether it holds. And here's the point that closes everything. The forward position you choose can be bold, because the war game has shown you the truth. And if we do it right, you're able to say to yourself, do you know what? This might hurt if we get it wrong, but we know it will not kill us, because we can see our floor and we know exactly what we won't risk. So recovering forward boldly is itself the offensive move. Same floor, same instrument, both directions.
Yeah, so watch Wintergate at the bottom, right? The technical battle turns, the ransomware is contained, the environment's being rebuilt clean, and Wintergate can finally think about its own future and destiny. And it doesn't ask about, it doesn't ask how do we get back to where we were, because it knows there's no back. Its members' expectations have shifted, the regulators watching differently, and the platform it's rebuilding is a chance to build something better than the one that it lost. So it war games its options against a damaged floor, right? A cautious rebuild to the old shape, a stronger, more resilient platform that maybe costs more, but removes the single point of failure that let this happen. And a bolder move still, using the rebuild to take on a smaller, struggling society's book. One that's come available precisely because that society couldn't survive the same storm that Wintergate just did.
And Wintergate runs each against its floor. And it sees that the boldest move, painful as it is, doesn't touch its musts. It can mass its shoulds and its coulds behind the move. It knows exactly how much room it has, and it can see that if the bet strains, it's hurt, it's not ended. So it chooses to recover forward boldly into a stronger position than it held before the attack. The same floor that carried it through the fall is now letting it win in the climb. It doesn't just survive the ransomware, it comes out larger, stronger, and more in control than the day it was hit. There's a level beyond even this, by the way, where you don't just know your route, you actively can concentrate the whole institution behind a single bet with a force that's hard to describe without sounding reckless, except it isn't, because the whole thing rests on seeing exactly how far you can go. But that's a conversation for a room with a whiteboard, not a webinar. But for today, I think the point stands on its own. Yeah. So here's the business case, really, really simply, because this is what the session was built as. Stop treating the floor as a compliance exercise or a defensive measure. It is foundational infrastructure. You build it once, and it answers a whole set of questions that your board already asks. Can we survive the worst and prove it? Can we see our true position continuously? And can we take risks deliberately and be bolder than a competitor who's guessing? Can we test our biggest decisions before we make them? And can we direct, importantly, our resilience spend to where it actually matters? And can we finally hold the one thing that no board's ever actually held? A single, honest, integrated account of what we are, what we owe, and what would take our future out of our own hands, and how close we stand to that line. These aren't 6 pieces of work. They are the same floor, just read 6 ways. Build it once, answer all of them. This is where the series resolves. The first of those questions, can we survive the worst, is what you've known for 3 sessions as MVC. That's what MVC is. MVC is the survival core and the test that holds one part of the floor. The floor answers 5 more things. So MVC was the way in. The floor is really the thing. And now you can see why we spent 2 sessions on the core before we showed you the whole. You needed the core to believe the floor was real.
You know, the honest position is that most of the raw material already exists in somewhere inside your own organization, right? You know, this isn't building from nothing. It's assembling what's scattered into one view, you know, calibrated into one question and instrumented so you can see it. That's the work. It's less than most would fear, and it's worth far more than most would think. You know, Windgate wasn't braver or better resourced than anyone on this call or any organization. But it did one thing differently. It could see its flaw during the event. So when the worst came, it could trade to survive. And when the tide turned, it could war game its way into a forward position, and it could take it boldly because it knew exactly what it would and wouldn't risk.
But the single most valuable thing your institution or organization can do is define its flaw. So that for the first time, you can see the line you've been governing without. And once you see it, everything Wintergate did becomes available to you. And if that's a conversation you want to have, that's a conversation that we want to have with you. So thank you for giving us your time across all 3 sessions. We're going to move on to questions. Ryan, one for you, I think. Who in the organisation should own this? Is it a risk function thing, a finance thing, or does it have to sit with the exec? Yeah, I think we've lost Ryan. That's fine. Well, I'll answer it's not my question, but I will answer the question. Well, look, this is a organisational wide piece. It is more than risk, and it certainly sits in the exec. You know, but think COO, SMF 24. It's kind of that there. I would move it a little bit further beyond risk function and think of it more operationally. Ryan, you're back. And you're on me.
Sorry. Yeah. Yeah, team's crushed, unfortunately. Right, so which question did you just cover? Was it the
risk function one?
Okay, so for a small society without a big team, is this realistic, or is it really something only the larger players can resource? All right, I'll answer first, Brian, and then you can go after if you want. So, look, actually, for a small society without a big team, a lot of the answers come across from your organization. So it's around coordination, right? You don't necessarily need a big team to be able to do this, right? All of the information you already hold within your organization. So this isn't a huge program of work or a intimidating project. It's around understanding what you need from across your organization to be able to combine that picture that we already spoke about. Right, I don't know if you want to build on that, but this is absolutely achievable within smaller teams or smaller organizations, and actually in some way it's probably easier.
I would agree. Look, the hardest part of this is, the hardest part. The bit that will take time is defining it. All right, asking your organization what is truly important across those 3 buckets that we talked about. Some of it is really, really obvious. There's a whole bunch of regulatory stuff, statute stuff that are must-dos. That's super clear. Stops, simple and straightforward. Where it gets a little bit tricky is where when we start talking about obligations we place on ourselves, and working those through. But once that piece is done, it's about how would you deliver that under pressure. Okay. And actually, in smaller organizations, I would argue the architecture is simpler, much more straightforward. And actually, some of the answers to these present themselves really clearly. One for you, Ryan. How often does the floor need refreshing once you've built it? Is it a set review thing, or does it need constant attention?
So I would say in an ideal world, then this is continuous information that's fed in, right? So it's a live and current picture of your floor. You know, things across your organization changes, infrastructure, change projects, whatever that might be, market, bunch of stuff, right? So this needs to be a live picture, you know, today where your organization sits, right? And that takes time for architects and to get that information and to have it in one single feed. But to answer your question, it's not a set and review thing. I would see it as a live, consistent picture that can be read by anyone across the organization, right? Whether that's financial, operational, whatever that might be.
Agreed. Look, as part of your broader review, right? Every year, as the regulatory environment changed, right? That's going to change some of your switches, right? But actually, when you think about stocks, they don't really change. What might change is your risk appetite, which might change the levels on some of these, you know. So most certainly yearly, you know, but it is not a foreign forget. No, not at all.
There's one from William. The concept of floor seems to draw parallels with minimum business continuity objective. Where do DCR see the alignment and differences between those, Brian?
Great question. I think there's a fair amount of overlap. I think where I would see differences, MBCO is what normally defined for an activity or a service. Okay, the floor is defined for the institution. That's probably the deepest kind of difference between the two. So your MBCO would sit underneath a business service, and it asks what's the minimum level this service must run at, right? So it's a service level construct. The floor sits below it. It's the floor that holds it up. All right. If we think about any organization, there's three parts to its mission. Okay. In order, remain viable. Hey, guess what we just talked about for the past three sessions? Okay. Remain viable, maintain operations, all right, and deliver services. But those three things are stacked. They all sit on top of each other. So if you've gone through your floor, there are no services to deliver because your organization is no longer viable. So they are deeply related, William. And it's about how they stack up on top of each other. You know, in the MBCO, it's a single level, but the floor has a structure, right? And we've described it as must, shoulds, and coulds. You can call them 1, 2, and 3. It doesn't really matter. Okay. I hope that answers your question. I'm hoping he's now going to say yes.
If it doesn't, come back to us.
Yep.
There's no more, I don't believe.
No more questions. Okay, well, if there's no more questions, thanks everybody for the time and coming back to all three webinars. I know it's a bit of a commitment. We create a thing called the MBC Foundation. We mention it each day, and come and spend a day with you and help you think some of this stuff through. The workshop can take any structure you like, if I'm honest. And the reason I say that is we talk about the structure, no problem. But actually, for every organization, there's a question about what does this mean for us? Okay. Oh, hang on, we got one more question. He talks about wargaming the recovery. Who needs to be in the room for that? Is it a board exercise or something the management team does and then takes it up? So wargaming, if you think about, if you are in recovery, you are no doubt in crisis, all right? Gold, silver, and bronze are probably activated and board are engaged, all right? Wargaming the recovery is no different to wargaming anything else. I would have the right people from each level in the room, but also recognizing that it's multidisciplinary. Okay, you have your tech folks, your data folks, customer folks, whatever it might be in the room, and who has to contribute. Right. So, box 12, perfect time. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for taking the time. Thanks for coming back for all three. We really do appreciate it. We'll be in touch with the hand up on the back of this, and have a great lunch. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye. Thank you.